Don't turn off the lights. I believed in steel, concrete, and the cold logic of engineering. Ghost stories were wrought for the gullible. Yet there I sat in the center of the rusted expanse of old Altman Bridge, the black river churning silently beneath my tires. The dashboard clock flickered to 12:03 a.m. I had followed the ritual to the letter. Engine killed, headlights extinguished, a layer of white baby powder dusted across the car's roof like fresh snow. Total darkness swallowed the world. I waited for the silence to prove me right. Instead, the silence grew teeth. It started with a vibration, a soft, rhythmic tap right above my head, followed by a wet, strangled sob drifting up from the abyss. Some stories, I realized too late, survive only because they are fed.
The condensation didn't last long, but the cold pit in my stomach felt permanent. I sat in the driver's seat of my Ford, the morning sun beating down on the driveway, yet I was shivering violently. My finger hovered over the glass, inches from the fading script. The letters were crude, jagged, as if drawn by a finger that had been broken and reset wrong. Don't turn off the lights. I reached out and touched the glass. It was dry on the outside. My breath hitched. I rubbed the inside of the windshield with my thumb. The condensation smeared, turning into a streak of water, erasing the T and the U. But beneath the moisture, I felt it, a residue, a cold, oily film that shouldn't have been there. It felt like touching the skin of a toad, clammy and dead. I recoiled, wiping my hand frantically on my jeans. Physics, I muttered, my voice cracking in the morning air. It's just physics, thermal differential, a prank. But I knew I had locked the car. I had the only key. And the alarm system, a screeching banshee of modern security, hadn't made a sound all night. I grabbed a rag from the glove compartment and scrubbed the glass. I scrubbed until my shoulder burned and the glass squeaked in protest. I wiped away the handprints. I wiped away the warning. I polished the windshield until it was nothing but clear, innocent glass, revealing the suburban street in front of me. But when I pulled my hand back, the smell hit me. River water, stagnant, rotting mud and decaying algae. The scent of the bridge. It filled the cabin, thick and suffocating, overriding the smell of my vanilla air freshener. I gagged, threw the door open, and scrambled out onto the pavement, gasping for clean air. My neighbors were leaving for work. Jim across the street was mowing his lawn. A woman was walking a golden retriever. The normalcy of it was offensive. They didn't know that miles away, something was waiting in the dark. They didn't know it had followed me home. I didn't go to work. I couldn't. I spent the next hour pacing my living room, the curtains drawn tight, then ripped open, then drawn again. The message looped in my mind like a corrupted video file. Don't turn off the lights. My house, a modest 2-story colonial I'd bought for its sturdy foundation and new wiring, suddenly felt fragile. It was just wood and drywall. It wasn't a fortress, it was a box. By 2 p.m., the exhaustion from the previous night's adrenaline crash began to set in.
But I refused to sleep. I brewed a pot of coffee, black, and sat at the kitchen table. The silence of the house was different now. Before, silence was peaceful, the absence of noise. Now it felt like a held breath. It felt like the silence on the bridge right before the tapping started. I checked the weather app on my phone. Sunset was at 7:42 p.m. 5 hours. I had 5 hours to convince myself I was crazy. I went to the garage to check the car again. I needed to see that it was just a car,
just steel and rubber. I opened the door from the kitchen and stepped onto the concrete floor. The garage was dim, illuminated only by the thin strip of daylight coming through the windows in the garage door. I froze. On the hood of the car, in the layer of dust that accumulates overnight, there was a disruption. Not a handprint this time, a slide. A long serpentine streak through the dust, starting from the front grille and winding its way up toward the windshield, as if something wet and heavy had dragged itself up the metal. I hit the switch on the wall. The fluorescent overheads flickered to life with a buzzing hum. The streak was damp. I backed away, my hand gripping the doorknob so hard my knuckles turned white. "Get a grip," I whispered. "A cat. It was a stray cat." But cats have paws. They don't drag their bodies like dead weight. I retreated into the house and locked the door. Then I deadbolted it. Then I wedged a chair under the handle. The logic of it was insane. If something could pass through a locked car door to write on the windshield, a deadbolt meant nothing. But the lizard brain demanded barriers. As the afternoon wore on, the shadows in the corners of the room began to lengthen. The sun dipped lower, painting the walls in shades of orange and bruising purple. Every minute that ticked by brought a rising tide of panic. 7 p.m. I walked through the house, systematically flipping switches. Kitchen, hallway, living room, bathroom, bedroom, guest room, basement. I turned them all on, every single bulb. The house blazed like a beacon. I even opened the oven door and turned on the internal light. I plugged in 3 nightlights I found in a junk drawer. 7:42 p.m. The sun vanished. Outside, the world turned to gray, then blue, then black. Inside, I sat on the couch, surrounded by artificial brilliance. It was so bright it hurt my eyes, but I didn't blink. I sat with a heavy flashlight in my lap, gripping it like a weapon. Tap.
My heart hammered against my ribs. It came from the window behind me. I spun around. The blinds were open, revealing the black square of the night. Nothing, just the reflection of my own terrified face and the lit room behind me. Tap, tap. It wasn't on the glass. I stood up, my legs trembling. The sound was distinct. It was the sound of a small, wet palm slapping against a surface, but it wasn't the window. I looked up. Tap. It was coming from the ceiling, from the second floor. I lived alone. The sound moved. It wasn't walking. It was a rhythmic slapping, like a child crawling on hands and knees. Slap, drag, slap, drag. It moved from directly above the living room toward the hallway that led to the stairs. I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, listening to the impossible intrusion in my sanctuary. Then the lights in the kitchen flickered. Just a quick pulse. Dim, then bright. My breath caught in my throat. They flickered again, longer this time. The hum of the refrigerator died, then groaned back to life. "No," I whispered. "Don't." The crawling sound above stopped. Silence. Then, directly from the top of the stairs, a sound drifted down. It wasn't the sobbing from the bridge. It was a giggle, wet, gurgling, and utterly devoid of mirth. And then, the kitchen light bulb exploded. Shards of glass rained down onto the tile floor. The kitchen plunged into darkness, leaving only the spillover light from the living room. I clicked the flashlight on, the beam cutting through the dust and smoke. "Don't turn off the lights." But I hadn't turned it off. It had been taken from me. From the dark maw of the kitchen, I heard the slide, the wet drag across the linoleum. Something was coming out of the shadows, and it was staying low to the ground.
Chapter 2. The Circuit Breaker.
The beam of my heavy mag light cut through the kitchen's gloom, a solitary shaft of white in a sea of suffocating black. Dust motes danced in the light, swirling violently in the wake of the exploded bulb. The smell was acrid, hot tungsten and shattered glass, but beneath it, that damp, cloying stench of the river was rising, thick enough to taste. I didn't move. I couldn't. My feet felt welded to the hardwood of the living room floor. "Who's there?" I shouted. The aggression in my voice was a facade, a thin veneer over terror. The only answer was the wet slap-drag sound on the linoleum. It was closer now, just beyond the island counter. I swept the flashlight beam left, then right. The light caught the refrigerator, the stove, the sink. There, on the pristine white tile of the kitchen floor, a trail of dark slime glistened. It looked like someone had dragged a soaking wet mop through a pile of compost and then pulled it across the room. The trail led from the back door, which was still deadbolted, and disappeared behind the kitchen island. Giggle. It came from behind the island, low, guttural. It sounded like water draining down a pipe, if that water could laugh. My grip on the flashlight tightened until my hand cramped. "I have a gun," I lied. The giggling stopped abruptly. Then a hand slapped onto the side of the island counter. It wasn't a child's hand, not anymore. It was bloated, pale, and waterlogged, the skin sloughing off in gray patches. The fingers were unnaturally long, the nails black and cracked. It gripped the edge of the granite countertop, wetness streaming down the cabinet wood. I didn't wait to see what was attached to the hand. I scrambled backward, knocking over a side table. The lamp on top of it crashed to the floor, the bulb shattering. The living room grew dimmer, relying now on the hallway light and the single floor lamp by the couch. "Don't turn off the lights." I wasn't turning them off. They were being taken. I sprinted for the stairs. My socks slipped on the polished wood, and I nearly went down, my shoulder slamming into the doorframe. I recovered, gasping, and threw myself up the steps, taking them two at a time. Behind me, the sound changed. The slow, deliberate dragging vanished, replaced by a rapid, wet pattering. Slap, 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 like a wet dog running on tile. It was fast, impossible fast. I hit the landing of the second floor and spun around.
The beam hit nothing but empty stairs, but on the third step from the bottom, a fresh, wet handprint was drying. Then on the fifth step, another appeared as I watched, invisible fingers pressing into the wood, leaving behind a stain of river muck. Seventh step, ninth step. It was climbing, invisible, but climbing. I lunged into my bedroom and slammed the door. I locked it. I threw the deadbolt I'd installed years ago for peace of mind, a peace that now felt like a cruel joke. I dragged my heavy oak dresser across the floor, the wood screeching, and wedged it against the door. I backed away, chest heaving, sweat stinging my eyes. "Lights," I wheezed. "Lights." I slapped the switch on the wall. The ceiling fixture flared to life. I scrambled to the bedside table and clicked on the lamp. I ran to the ensuite bathroom and flipped that switch too. The room was bathed in reassuring artificial brightness. I stood in the center of the room, turning in circles, the flashlight still clutched in my hand like a talisman. I listened. Silence. No dragging, no giggling, just the hum of the air conditioning and the pounding of blood in my ears. I looked at the door. The dresser held firm. Maybe it couldn't come into the light. The message on the windshield, "Don't turn off the lights," implied that the light was a barrier, a shield. As long as the photons were bouncing off the walls, the thing from the bridge couldn't manifest. I checked my phone. 8:15 p.m. The sun wouldn't rise for another 10 hours. I sat on the edge of the bed, my body vibrating with adrenaline. I needed a plan. I needed to leave. But my car keys were downstairs on the kitchen hook, right next to where that thing had been. And even if I got the keys, the car was tainted. It was the vessel that brought this here. I dialed 911. The phone rang. Once. Twice. Click. 911, what is your emergency? The operator's voice was calm, detached. There's someone in my house, I whispered, my eyes darting to the blocked door. I'm trapped in the bedroom. Please, send help. Sir, what is your address? I gave it to her, stumbling over the numbers. Stay on the line, she said. Officers are dispatched. Are you safe right now? I think so. The lights? I have the lights on. Sir, is the intruder armed? I don't know. I couldn't say it. I couldn't say it's a ghost from a bridge. Just hurry. Stay on the line.
I held the phone to my ear, the silence stretching. Then, the bedside lamp flickered. My heart stopped. It buzzed, dimmed to a dull orange glow, and then surged back to full brightness. Sir? The operator asked. The power, I whispered. It's messing with the power. Who is? The intruder. A loud pop came from the bathroom. I spun around. The bathroom vanity bulbs had blown out. Darkness spilled from the bathroom doorway into the bedroom. No, I moaned. No, no, no. I pointed the flashlight at the bathroom door. Sir, are you still there? Hurry, I screamed into the phone. The ceiling fixture above me began to hum, a low, angry vibration. The glass dome covering the bulbs started to rattle against the mounting. Tink, tink, tink. It wasn't mechanical vibration. Something was tapping on the glass from the inside. I looked up, blinded by the glare. Inside the frosted glass bowl of the fixture, shadows were swirling, like water trapped in a fishbowl. The operator was speaking, but her voice was distorting. Sir, lights. Underneath, water. What? I pulled the phone away. The screen was flickering, the digital display scrambling into static. Don't turn off. The operator's voice warped, pitching down into a deep, slow slur, before snapping into that high, wet giggle. I threw the phone across the room. It hit the wall and slid to the floor, the screen dead. The ceiling lights surged, brighter than any bulb should be able to go. The filaments screamed. Then, with a sound like a gunshot, the fixture exploded. Glass rained down on me. I threw my arms over my head, feeling shards slice into my forearms. The room plunged into absolute darkness. I fumbled for the flashlight, clicking the button frantically. Nothing. I shook it. I hit it against my palm. Dead. I was blind. The silence returned, heavy, and went. From the corner of the room, near the now dark bathroom, I heard a sound. Drip, drip, drip. Water dripping onto the carpet. Please, I whispered into the dark. Leave me alone. A cold puff of air hit my face, smelling of rotting vegetation and old mud. Then, a voice. Not from the phone, not from the bridge, but from right beside my ear. You turned them off. A small, icy hand grabbed my ankle. I kicked out, screaming, my foot connecting with something soft and yielding, like a bag of wet clay. I scrambled backward onto the bed, pressing my back against the headboard. I needed light.
My eyes adjusted slightly to the gloom. The moonlight filtering through the curtains offered a gray, hazy illumination. The dresser I had blocked the door with was moving. Slowly, inch by inch, it was sliding away from the door, not being pushed from the outside, being pulled. The bedroom door creaked open. The hallway light was out. The entire house was dead. But in the doorway, silhouetted against the black void of the hall, stood a figure. It was small, maybe 3 feet tall. It dripped. It raised a hand, pointing a crooked finger at me. And then the smoke alarm LED on the ceiling blinked red. A tiny, singular pulse of red light. In that split-second red flash, I saw it. It wasn't standing on the floor. It was floating. And its face was smooth. No eyes, no nose, just a mouth. A vertical slit that seemed to have been cut with a razor, stitched shut with river weeds. The red light vanished. Run, I told myself. I launched myself off the bed, not toward the door, but toward the window. I didn't care about the drop. I didn't care about the glass. I hit the window with my shoulder. The pane shattered. I tumbled into the cool night air, flailing, gravity taking hold as the second floor fell away beneath me.
Chapter 3: The Blast Radius. The azalea bushes broke my fall, but they didn't catch me gently. I crashed through the woody stems, branches whipping against my face and arms, tearing fresh cuts into skin already lacerated by the window glass. I hit the mulch with a bone-jarring thud that knocked the wind out of me. For a moment, I just lay there, staring up at the night sky, gasping for air that refused to fill my lungs. My left ankle throbbed, a hot, pulsing spike of pain, but nothing felt broken. I rolled onto my side, spitting out dirt and leaves, and looked back at the house. It was a black void. Every other house on the street was a beacon of suburban comfort, glowing with porch lights and the blue flicker of televisions. But my house was dead. It sat like a rot in the center of the neighborhood, a square of absolute darkness. And in the second-story window, the jagged, gaping maw I had just thrown myself through, something was moving. I squinted through the pane. The moonlight was weak, but it caught the edge of a shard of glass still stuck in the frame. Beside it, 2 small, pale hands gripped the sill. They didn't look like hands anymore. They looked like clumps of wet dough, molded vaguely into the shape of fingers. They squeezed the wood, and I saw the paint flake away, dissolving into gray sludge. I had peeked over the sill. It had no eyes, just that vertical, stitched-up slit of a mouth. It tilted its head, mimicking a curious dog. Kiggle. The sound didn't dissipate in the open air. It cut through the chirping of crickets and the distant hum of traffic like a razor wire. It was right next to my ear. I scrambled backward, crab-walking through the mulch, ignoring the screaming protest of my ankle. I needed light. Real light. Not the moon, not the stars. I needed electricity. I clawed my way onto the driveway. The concrete was cold and rough against my palms. I forced myself to stand, swaying as the world tilted. "Jim!" I croaked. My voice was a wreck. I tried again, screaming this time. "Jim!" I limped toward the house across the street. Jim was a retired mechanic, a guy who kept his lawn immaculate and his garage lit up like a stadium. His porch light was on, a beautiful, warm yellow bug light that looked like salvation. I reached the middle of the street. The asphalt was still warm from the day's sun, but as I hobbled across the center line, the temperature plummeted. A cold wind swept down the street.
It didn't smell like manicured lawns or barbecue smoke. It smelled of stagnant water, silt, decay. I heard it behind me. Slap. Drag. Slap. Drag. It was out of the house. I didn't look back. I lunged for Jim's front walk, throwing myself up his porch steps. I pounded on his door with a fist that was slick with my own blood. Jim, open the door. Call the police. I hammered the wood until my hand went numb. Behind me, the streetlights began to hum. It was a low electric buzz. Rising in pitch, I turned around, pressing my back against Jim's front door. The streetlight at the far end of the cul-de-sac flickered. Once. Twice. Then, with a sound like a cracking whip, the bulb burst. Sparks rained down onto the asphalt, sizzling out before they hit the ground. The darkness jumped forward. The next streetlight, 50 feet closer, started to buzz. "Jim!" I screamed, kicking the door with my good heel. The lock clicked. The door swung open. Jim stood there in his bathrobe, eyes wide, a baseball bat in his hand. He looked at me, bleeding, covered in mulch, terrified, and lowered the bat slightly. "Mike? What the hell is going on? I heard glass break and—" "Let me in," I gasped, shoving past him. "Close the door, lock it, turn on every light you have." "Mike, you're bleeding all over my—" "Do it!" I roared, slamming the door shut myself and throwing the deadbolt. I collapsed against the wall of his foyer. It was bright here. A chandelier overhead, a lamp on the console table. The light was glorious. I bathed in it, letting it burn the image of that eyeless face out of my retinas. Jim was staring at me, his face pale. "Mike, talk to me. Is it a burglar? Did someone break in?" "Something like that," I wheezed. "Do you have a gun?" "A gun? No, I have a bat. Mike, you need an ambulance." He reached for the landline on the wall. "Don't," I warned, pushing myself off the wall. "Don't use the phone. It travels through the lines, the power. It messes with the power." Jim paused, the receiver halfway to his ear. He looked at me like I was having a psychotic break. "Travels through the lines? Mike, you're in shock. Sit down. I'm calling the cops." He put the phone to his ear. I watched the chandelier. "Please," I prayed. "Hold on. Just hold on." Jim frowned. He tapped the hook switch. Dead air. He looked at the phone, then at me. "Line's dead." "It's here," I whispered. "What is?" "Tap." We both froze. The sound came from the front door. Right behind me. Tap. Tap. It wasn't a knock. It was a wet, sticky sound, like a piece of raw liver being thrown against the wood. Jim gripped his bat tighter. "Who's there?" he shouted, his voice trying for authority, but landing on fear. "Don't open it," I said. "Whatever you do, don't open it." "Is that the guy?" Jim asked, stepping toward the peephole. "Jim, no!" He leaned in, closing one eye to look through the fisheye lens. I watched his back. I saw his muscles tense. I saw his hand grip the bat until his knuckles turned white. He stood there for a long time. 5 seconds. 10. "Jim?" He didn't answer. He just kept staring. Then he started to shake. A low tremor at first, then a violent shuddering. "Jim, get away from the door." He pulled back slowly. He turned to face me. His face was drained of blood. His eyes were wide, pupils dilated to pinpricks. "It's wet," Jim whispered. "The whole porch, it's underwater." "What?" "I looked out," he stammered. "The yard is gone. The street is gone. It's just black water.
and there's something standing on the railing. The chandelier flickered. My stomach dropped. We have to go. We can't stay here. Go where? Jim's voice rose to a panic. You said the street is gone. It's an illusion, I said, though I didn't believe it myself. It wants us to think we're trapped. We need to get to a car. Your truck, is it in the garage? Yeah. Keys? In the kitchen. Get them, now. The chandelier buzzed. One of the 5 bulbs popped with a sharp tink, showering fine glass onto the foyer rug. Jim yelped and scrambled toward the kitchen. I hobbled after him, the pain in my ankle a dull roar compared to the terror screaming in my veins. The kitchen was bright, fluorescent tubes. But as we entered, I saw it. The sink. The faucet was off, but a dark, viscous sludge was bubbling up from the drain. It spilled over the chrome lip, sliding silently down into the basin. Jim grabbed his keys from the counter. I got 'em, let's go. We turned toward the door that led to the garage. Boom. The front door, the heavy, solid wood door with the deadbolt, didn't just open, it exploded inward. Splinters and hinges flew across the foyer. The storm door shattered. A wave of water rushed in, not a flood, but a surge, carrying with it mud, dead leaves, and the stench of the river. It washed over the hardwood, curling around the legs of the console table.
And standing in the wreckage of the door frame was the silhouette. It was taller now. It stretched, the shadows elongating, reaching up to the top of the door frame. The small, childlike shape was gone, replaced by something lanky and disjointed, like a drowning victim that had been pulled apart and put back together wrong. The lights in the foyer died instantly. The darkness rushed toward the kitchen. "Garage!" I screamed. Jim slammed his hand on the garage door opener. We practically fell into the garage. He hit the button to close the door behind us, but I grabbed his arm. "No, the car! Get in the truck!" If we closed the door, we were trapped in a box with it. We scrambled into his Ford F-150. I threw myself into the passenger seat. Jim fumbled with the ignition. The kitchen door, the one we had just come through, rattled. The knob turned. "Start it, Jim, start it!" The engine roared to life. The headlights snapped on, illuminating the back wall of the garage, tools, a lawnmower, bags of fertilizer, and water. Seeping under the door from the house, a black stain spreading across the concrete floor toward the truck's tires. "Reverse!" I yelled. Jim slammed the gear stick into R. He didn't wait for the garage door to open. He floored it. The truck lurched backward. Metal screamed as we smashed through the garage door. Wood splintered, aluminum buckled, and we shot out into the driveway, dragging debris with us. Jim spun the wheel, tires screeching on the asphalt. He threw it into drive and hammered the gas. We sped down the street, away from my dark house, away from his ruined door. I looked in the side mirror. The streetlights were still popping, a chain reaction of darkness chasing us. Pop, pop, pop. They were exploding in sequence, keeping pace with the truck. "Faster," I said, gripping the dashboard. "I'm doing 50, Jim shouted. "It's not enough." Ahead of us, the intersection was coming up, the main road. There would be cars there, people, safety. But as the headlights swept over the road ahead, I saw something that made my blood freeze. Standing in the middle of the road, directly in our path, was a line of them. Small, pale figures, hand in hand, a chain of children, dripping wet, their heads bowed. "Jim, look out!" Jim slammed on the brakes. The truck skidded, the rear end fishtailing, the smell of burnt rubber mixed with the river stench. We slid sideways, the headlights sweeping across the line of figures.
As the truck came to a halt, inches from the line of children, they all looked up in unison. No eyes, just mouths. And the streetlights overhead exploded, plunging us into total darkness. "Don't," I whispered, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "Don't stop the engine." But the engine sputtered. It coughed. And then it died.
The silence that followed the death of the engine was heavier than the darkness. It wasn't empty. It was pressurized, pressing against the windows of the Ford F-150 like deep ocean water against a bathysphere. "Start it," I whispered, my voice trembling so hard the words barely formed. "Jim, start it." Jim twisted the key. The starter motor whined, a high, desperate ree, but the engine didn't catch. It didn't even sputter. It sounded hollow, as if the pistons were churning through sludge instead of gasoline. "Come on," Jim hissed, slamming his hand against the steering wheel. He twisted the key again. Ree. Nothing. Outside, the world had vanished. The streetlights were gone. The houses were gone. There was only a wall of impenetrable blackness pressing against the glass. And the smell. It was seeping through the vents, thick and cloying, the stench of stagnant river mud, rotting fish, and old, wet decay. "Lock the doors," I said. "They're locked," Jim yelled back, his composure fracturing. "They're locked, Mike." Then, the condensation started. It began at the corners of the windshield, creeping inward like frost, but gray and oily. It spread rapidly, obscuring the view of the dark hood. Within seconds, the entire cabin was fogged over, sealing us in a gray cocoon. Tap. It came from my side, the passenger window. I recoiled, pressing myself toward the center console, away from the glass. Tap. Tap. 2 small points of pressure appeared on the fogged glass. Then, slowly, they slid downward, creating 2 long, clear streaks. "Don't look at it," Jim breathed. He was staring straight ahead, knuckles white on the wheel. Just don't look at it." "It's inside," I whispered. "Jim, the fog is on the inside." The streaks on the window weren't clearing the fog from the outside. Something was tracing them from within the cabin, invisible fingers dragging through the condensation mere inches from my face. The temperature in the truck plummeted. My breath began to mist in the air. "Flashlight," Jim said suddenly. "Glove box. There's a tactical light." I lunged for the glove compartment. My fingers fumbled with the latch. It popped open, spilling maintenance records and napkins onto my lap. I dug through the mess, my hand closing around cold metal. A small, heavy flashlight. I clicked it on. The beam was blindingly bright in the small space. I swept it across the dashboard, over the steering wheel.
Jim wasn't looking at the road anymore. He was looking at his feet. "Mike," he whimpered. I shone the light down into the driver's side footwell. Water. Black, murky water was rising from the floor mats. It bubbled up from beneath the pedals, silent and relentless. It was already over the soles of Jim's sneakers. "It's leaking in," Jim said, his voice rising to a shriek. "How is it leaking in?" "Get your feet up." "It's cold. It burns." Jim kicked at the pedals, splashing the black liquid. It wasn't just water. It was thick, like oil mixed with silt. Where it touched his jeans, the fabric darkened and seemed to dissolve. I moved the light to my side. The floor mat was submerged. The liquid was rising fast, filling the footwells, pooling around the transmission hump. "We have to get out," I said. "Jim, we have to run." "Run where?" Jim screamed, turning to me. His face was a mask of terror, illuminated harshly by the flashlight beam. "There's nothing out there. You saw them, the line of kids." "We can't stay in here. It's filling up." As if to punctuate my point, a gurgling sound erupted from the dashboard vents. Thick black sludge began to ooze out of the air conditioning louvers, dripping onto the radio, onto the gear shift. giggle. The sound came from the back seat. We both froze. Slowly, terrifyingly, I rotated the flashlight beam toward the rear of the extended cab. The back seat was empty, but the upholstery was soaking wet. And sitting in the center of the bench seat was a single, perfect handprint indented into the wet fabric. "Open the door," I commanded, grabbing the handle on my side. I pulled the lever. Locked. I pulled the manual lock pin up. It snapped back down instantly, as if pulled by a magnet. "It won't open," I shouted, slamming my shoulder against the door. It was like hitting a concrete wall. "Mike," Jim screamed. I whipped the light back to him. The water in his footwell was churning violently. Something was in the water. Something beneath the surface. Jim's leg jerked downward. "It's got me," he shrieked. "It's got my leg." He thrashed, gripping the steering wheel with both hands, his body contorting as he tried to pull himself up. But he was being dragged down, impossibly, into the floor of the truck. The metal floorboard should have stopped him, but his calf was disappearing into the black liquid, as if the bottom of the truck had dissolved into a deep pool. "Help me." I grabbed his arm.
Dropping the flashlight, the beam spun wildly, creating a strobe effect of terror, flashing on Jim's terrified face, the oozing dashboard, the fogged windows. I pulled with everything I had. Jim was heavy, a big man, but the force pulling him down was inexorable. It felt like trying to pull a boulder out of quicksand. "It's cutting me," Jim wailed. "It's cold. It's so cold." The water rose to the seat level. It was freezing, biting into my skin where it splashed. Then the flashlight rolled off the center console and fell into the muck in the passenger footwell. The light didn't go out immediately. It shone up through the black water, casting an eerie green underglow throughout the cab. In that diffused underwater light, I saw them. Faces. Dozens of them. Small, pale faces floating in the water that filled the floorboards. They drifted just below the surface, mouths open in silent screams, eyes hollowed out. They were swarming Jim's legs. "Let me go," Jim gagged, water splashing into his mouth. He was waist deep now, sinking into the driver's seat, which was melting away into the abyss. "Jim!" I screamed, losing my grip on his wet flannel shirt. He looked at me one last time. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and filled with a realization that broke my heart. "Don't turn off the lights," he whispered. And then he was gone. He was yanked down with a violent splash. The black water swirled where he had been, bubbling and frothing. The driver's seat was empty. The steering wheel stood alone. I was alone in the cab. The water was rising toward me. I scrambled up, pressing my back against the roof, feet on the dashboard. The flashlight in the water flickered, the battery dying or the seal failing. The green glow pulsed, dim, bright, dim. Giggle. The sound came from the water below me. I looked at the passenger window. The condensation was thick, but through it I saw a faint glow. Not a street light, a house light, distant, maybe 100 yards away. I grabbed the door handle again. It snapped back. I looked at the flashlight. It was fading. When it died, I would be in total darkness with the things in the water. I needed to break the glass. I didn't have a hammer. I didn't have the bat. Jim had dropped it in the back. I jammed my back against the driver's side door and kicked out with my good leg, driving my heel into the passenger window. Thud. The glass held. The water lapped at the dashboard. A small, wet hand reached out of the liquid, grasping for my shoelace. I kicked again, harder, screaming with the effort. Thud. A crack, spiderwebbed across the glass. The hand grabbed my ankle. Its grip was iron cold. It burned like dry ice. "No!" I shrieked, kicking wildly with my other foot, shaking off the grip. I coiled my leg back and drove my heel into the center of the spiderweb. Crash! The safety glass shattered into a million diamonds, raining out onto the asphalt. I didn't hesitate. I threw myself through the opening, tumbling out of the truck and onto the road. I hit the pavement hard, rolling to absorb the impact, my injured ankle screaming in protest. I scrambled to my hands and knees, gasping for air that didn't smell like a tomb. I looked back at the truck. It sat dead in the middle of the road. No lights, no sound. But inside, the cab was full. Pressed against the windshield, against the side windows, were faces. Hundreds of them, pale, distorted, mashed against the glass from the inside, watching me. And from the broken passenger window, the black water spilled out like a severed artery, cascading onto the street. It didn't pool. It flowed toward me. I turned and ran. I ran toward the distant light, limping, sobbing, the sound of wet, slapping footsteps echoing on the pavement behind me. I didn't look back. I knew what I would see. The bridge hadn't just followed me home. The bridge was here, and it was flooding the world.
The asphalt was turning into mud. It wasn't a hallucination. I could feel the change through the thin soles of my sneakers. The solid, reassuring impact of pavement was gone, replaced by a squelching, yielding softness that tried to suck my shoes off with every step. I didn't stop running. I couldn't. Behind me, the sound was getting louder. It wasn't just the wet slap drag of one entity anymore. It was a chorus, a multitude of wet feet hitting the ground, a rhythmic splashing cadence that sounded like a flash flood tearing through a canyon. Giggle. Sob. Giggle. The sounds overlapped, weaving a tapestry of madness that pushed me harder. My lungs burned like I had inhaled battery acid. My ankle, twisted in the fall from the window, sent jagged lightning bolts of pain up my leg, but adrenaline acted as a crude anesthetic. I kept my eyes locked on the distant light. It was a beacon in a world that was being rapidly erased. To my left and right, the suburban houses, the brick colonials, the split levels, the manicured lawns, were wrong. They were dark, yes, but they were also receding. They looked flat, like cardboard cutouts placed too far back on a stage. Mist curled around their foundations, obscuring the driveways, making it look as if the homes were floating on a dark, calm lake. I stumbled, my hand splashing into a puddle that shouldn't have been there. It was warm, oily. I scrambled up, wiping the muck on my jeans. The light ahead grew sharper. It was the harsh, blue-white glare of commercial fluorescence. A gas station, the Quick Mart at the edge of the subdivision, where the residential streets met the old county highway. "Please," I wheezed, "please be open." I reached the edge of the station's lot. The transition was jarring. One moment I was slogging through spectral mud, and the next my feet hit solid, dry concrete. The gas station was an island of brilliance. The canopy over the pumps blazed with LED strips. The store itself was a glass box of safety, washed in aggressive, sterile light. I sprinted past the pumps. I didn't look at the reflections in the glass of the pump displays. I knew better now. Mirrors were windows, glass was a door. I hit the double glass doors of the store with my shoulder, bursting inside. A bell chimed, ding-dong, a cheerful, mundane sound that felt violently out of place. "Whoa, hey, you can't just..." The clerk, a teenager with acne scars and a green vest.
I must have looked like a monster. I was covered in black mud, bleeding from the glass cuts on my arms and face, my clothes torn, my chest heaving like a dying engine. "Lock the doors.
I gasped, collapsing against the counter. Lock them now. Dude, are you drunk? I'm calling the cops. The kid reached for the landline behind the register. No. I lunged over the counter, grabbing his wrist. My hand left a smear of black slime on his skin. He recoiled, yelping in disgust. Don't touch the phone, I screamed. The lines. They travel through the lines. Just lock the doors. The kid backed away, hands raised, eyes wide. Okay, chill, man. I'm not calling anyone. Just stay there. He moved to the door switch under the counter. A loud magnetic clunk echoed through the store as the automatic locks engaged. I slid down to the floor, putting my back against the candy aisle display. I stared at the ceiling. Rows of long fluorescent tubes hummed steadily. They were beautiful. They were life. You need an ambulance, man, the clerk said, his voice trembling. He was wiping the black slime off his wrist with a paper towel, but the stain wasn't coming off. It looked like a bruise spreading under his skin. I need light, I whispered. Do you have a generator? A what? No. Look, what happened to you? Were you in a wreck? The bridge, I said, closing my eyes for a second before snapping them open in panic. I went to the bridge. The kid froze. The color drained from his face. Everyone in this county knew about the bridge. They knew it as a place to drink beer and scare girlfriends. They didn't know it as a predator. You went to Altman Bridge? He asked softly. At night. Midnight. The kid looked at the glass doors. Beyond the brightly lit interior, the parking lot was visible, bathed in the canopy lights. But beyond the canopy, nothing. Usually, you could see the streetlights of the highway. You could see the headlights of passing cars. You could see the trees. Now, there was just a wall of black. It looked solid, like someone had painted the windows with tar. Where are the cars? The clerk asked. He walked slowly around the counter toward the front of the store. Don't go near the glass, I warned, struggling to stand up. It's pitch black out there, he muttered. Is there a blackout? But we have power. He pressed his face closer to the glass. Don't, I shouted.
The sound was sharp, distinct, and came from the other side of the safety glass, right in front of the kid's face. He jumped back, tripping over his own feet and landing hard on the linoleum. What was that? He shrieked. On the glass, condensation bloomed. It formed a perfect circle, the size of a face. Then 2 small handprints appeared below it. It followed me, I said, my voice hollow. I'm sorry, I brought it here. The lights in the store flickered. The hum of the refrigerator units lining the back wall, the ones filled with beer and soda, changed pitch. It went from a steady drone to a grinding, wet gurgle. The power, the kid stammered. Why is the power flickering? It eats the light, I said. It wants us in the dark. I scanned the store. It was a trap, a glass box. If the lights went out here, there was nowhere to hide. No upstairs bedroom, no heavy furniture to block the doors, just aisles of chips and a counter. Do you have flashlights? I asked. Batteries? Lighter fluid? Aisle 4, the kid said, pointing a shaking finger. Automotive section. I limped to the aisle. I grabbed 3 heavy-duty flashlights and ripped the packaging open with my teeth. I grabbed packs of D batteries. I stuffed them into my pockets. Grab the lighter fluid, I yelled at the kid, and rags, anything flammable. Are you crazy? You can't start a fire in a gas station. If the lights go out, fire is all we have. Crash. We both spun around. At the back of the store, the glass door of the beer cooler had shattered. Cans of lager rolled out onto the floor, foaming and hissing, but mixed with the beer was the black water. It poured out of the cooler as if the refrigerator was a portal to the river bottom. And crawling out of the cooler shelf, squeezing between the rows of bottles, was a shape. It was small, pale, wet. It dropped to the floor with a wet slap. It stood up. It was wearing a tattered, mud-stained nightgown. Its hair was plastered to its skull. It turned its eyeless face toward us.
The clerk screamed, a high, thin sound of pure primal terror. Then the lights in the cooler section blew out. Pop, pop, pop. The darkness rushed forward, swallowing the back aisle. "Front," I yelled. "Get behind the counter." The kid scrambled over the counter, huddling in the corner. I vaulted over after him, gripping a flashlight in one hand and a bottle of lighter fluid in the other. "It's inside."
It's inside the store. "Keep your eyes on the dark," I said, clicking the flashlight on. I aimed it at the encroaching shadow. The beam cut through the gloom. The aisle was empty. But the black water was spreading. It was seeping under the shelves, creeping across the white tiles, staining the grout. Giggle. It came from above. I looked up. The drop ceiling tiles, they were staining. Dark, wet circles were spreading across the white acoustic foam. Drip. A drop of black sludge fell, landing on the counter between us. Then another. Drip. 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 It was raining inside the store. The roof, I realized. They're on the roof. The overhead fluorescent tubes began to swing, not from wind. Something heavy was walking on top of them, in the crawl space above the ceiling. Creak. Snap. A metal support bracket groaned. "They're going to come down," I said. "The ceiling is going to collapse." The kid looked at me, tears streaming down his face. "I don't want to die. I just started this job. I don't want to die." "Then help me," I snapped. "We need to fortify. The lighter fluid. Pour it on the floor in front of the counter. Make a line." "You'll blow us up." "The pumps are outside. This is just tile and plastic. Do it." He grabbed a bottle of charcoal starter from the display on the counter and squirted a thick line of fluid across the floor, creating a barrier between us and the aisles. The ceiling sagged. A tile dissolved in wet mush and fell, revealing the black cavity above. From the hole, a face looked down. It was upside down. Long, wet hair hung down like stalactites. It smiled. The mouth opened too wide, revealing rows of needle-like teeth that no human child should have. The fluorescent lights directly above the counter flickered. "Lighted," I yelled. The kid fumbled with a Bic lighter. He struck it. Nothing. "Come on." The thing in the ceiling reached down, its arm elongated, stretching impossibly, the fingers grasping for the kid's head. He struck the lighter again. A flame sparked. He threw the lighter onto the fluid. Whoosh! A wall of yellow fire erupted in front of the counter. The heat was intense, blistering. The thing in the ceiling shrieked, a sound like grinding metal, and retracted its arm. The fire cast wild, dancing shadows against the back wall. The smoke curled up, black and oily. For a moment, the fire held them back.
The water on the floor hissed and steamed where it met the flames. But then I looked at the glass doors at the front of the store. The firelight illuminated what was outside. The parking lot was gone. The pumps were gone.
The gas station was floating in the middle of a vast black ocean, and rising from the water surrounding the glass box on all sides were hundreds of them. They pressed against the glass, layer upon layer of pale, wet bodies, until the windows were nothing but a wall of flesh. And then the main power grid gave up. The fluorescent lights died. The canopy lights outside died. The only light left was the line of fire on the floor, and the fire was getting lower. The black water was rising to meet it.
Chapter 6: The Black Tide. The fire didn't burn out. It drowned. The line of lighter fluid, our only barrier against the encroaching dark, didn't flicker or fade naturally. The black sludge seeping across the linoleum rose like a sentient tide, rolling over the yellow flames with a wet, hissing finality. Where the sludge touched the fire, the light didn't just vanish, it was smothered, leaving behind coils of acrid, oily smoke that smelled of burning hair and river rot. "It's going out," the kid screamed, his voice cracking into a sob. He was backing away, his heels skidding on the slick tiles, pressing himself into the corner where the cigarette display met the wall. "Do something." I fumbled with the plastic packaging of the flashlights I'd grabbed, my fingers slick with sweat and blood. I ripped a tactical eddy light free, jammed the D batteries inside, and screwed the cap on. Click. A beam of harsh blue-white light cut through the gloom. It was powerful, blindingly so, but in this suffocating darkness, it felt like a toy laser pointer in a cavern. "Grab a light," I yelled, tossing a second package to the kid. "If the fire dies, you need your own source." He caught it, but his hands were shaking so violently he couldn't tear the plastic. He clawed at it, hyperventilating. Crash. The sound was like a gunshot. A spiderweb fracture appeared on the main glass doors of the store. Outside, the wall of pale bodies pressed harder. I could see them clearly now in the dying light of the fire. They weren't just standing there. They were climbing over each other, a mound of wet, gray flesh. Faces pressed against the glass, distorting. Noses flattened, lips spread wide to reveal black, toothless gums. They were heavy. The glass bowed inward. "The back," I commanded, grabbing the kid by his vest. "Is there a back room, an office, a freezer?" The manager's office," he stammered, pointing toward a steel door past the soda fountains. "Go, now." I shoved him. He stumbled, dropping the opened flashlight package into the rising muck on the floor. He didn't stop to pick it up. He scrambled toward the steel door. I aimed my flashlight at the glass front of the store. The fire was gone now. The only illumination came from my hand. And then, the glass gave way. It didn't shatter into diamonds like safety glass should. It exploded inward under the weight of the black ocean, a torrent of freezing. Viscous water surged into the store, carrying with it the smell of 1,000 opened graves. And with the water came the children. They washed in like debris, tumbling over the checkout counter, sliding across the floor. Dozens of them. They were small, their limbs rubbery and disjointed. They hit the floor and immediately began to crawl, their movements jerky and fast, like spiders. Giggle, giggle, giggle. The sound was deafening, bouncing off the tile walls, multiplying until it sounded like a choir of the damned. I turned and ran. The water was already at my ankles, cold enough to burn. It felt thick, clinging to my jeans, trying to drag me down. "Open the door," I screamed at the kid. He was at the steel door, fumbling with a ring of keys. "I can't find the right one. It's locked." "Hurry!" I spun around, shining the light back at the horde. The beam hit the lead crawler. It froze. The light seemed to hurt it. Its skin smoked where the beam touched, turning gray to black. It hissed, shielding its eyeless face with a wet hand. But there were too many of them. They flowed around the beam, staying in the shadows, flanking us. They were moving along the walls, climbing the shelves of the chip aisle, dropping from the ceiling tiles. "Got it!
the kid yelled. The deadbolt clicked. He threw the door open. "Get in!" He scrambled inside. I followed, backing in, keeping the flashlight trained on the store. Just as I crossed the threshold, something grabbed my ankle. It wasn't a hand, it was a tongue. Long, gray, and muscular. It had shot out from the darkness of the slushy machine niche. It wrapped around my boot, slick with mucus. I fell hard, my chin slamming against the concrete floor of the office. The flashlight skittered out of my hand, spinning across the room, the beam flashing wildly, wall, ceiling, kid, wall. "Help me," I roared, kicking at the thing. I was being dragged out. The strength of it was impossible. I clawed at the doorframe, my fingernails peeling back the paint. The kid stood in the corner of the office, trembling. He looked at me. He looked at the darkness spilling in through the door. He looked at the flashlight spinning on the floor. "Close the door," he whispered. "No, pull me in." The kid's eyes were wide, vacant. He wasn't seeing me anymore. He was seeing the inevitable. He lunged. Not for me, for the door. He slammed the steel door shut. It hit my shin, bouncing off bone. I screamed.
"I'm sorry," he sobbed from inside, pushing the door again. "You idiot!" I shrieked, adrenaline overriding the agony. I kicked backward with my free leg, my heel connecting with something soft and wet. The grip on my ankle loosened. I scrambled forward, pulling my leg inside just as the kid slammed the door a third time. Clang! The latch engaged, the deadbolt slid home. We were inside. The office was small, cluttered with boxes of syrup, receipt paper, and a safe. It smelled of dust and stale coffee. And it was pitch black. "The light," I gasped, rolling onto my back. "Where is the light?" I don't know," the kid whimpered. I swept my hand across the floor. My fingers brushed cold metal, the flashlight. I grabbed it and clicked it on. The beam hit the kid. He was pressed against the far wall, hugging his knees. He looked at me, shame and terror warring on his face. "You tried to kill me," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "They were coming," he wept. "They were right there." I didn't have time to argue ethics. I shined the light at the bottom of the door. Black sludge was already oozing under the jam. It bubbled, forming small pools on the concrete. Tap, tap, tap. Fingernails on steel from the other side. "Open up," a voice mimicked. It wasn't the bridge entity's voice. It was my voice, recorded and played back with a wet, gurgling distortion. "Hurry, pull me in." The kid covered his ears. "Make it stop." I scanned the room. No windows, one door. We were in a metal box, a coffin. On the desk, a bank of security monitors flickered on emergency power. I looked at the screens. Camera 1, the front counter, submerged. The store was filled with black water up to the ceiling. Bodies floated in it, suspended in the dark fluid like specimens in a jar. Camera 2, the pumps, gone, just an expanse of rippling black ocean. Camera 3, the roof. I froze. The roof camera showed the flat gravel surface of the gas station. It was dry. Above it, the sky was a swirling vortex of heavy purple clouds, but it wasn't underwater. "There's a hatch," I said, shining the light on the ceiling of the office. "Is there a ladder?" The kid looked up, wiping his nose. "Yeah, in the corner, behind the file cabinet." I moved the cabinet, grinding metal against concrete. There it was, a rusted iron ladder bolted to the wall, leading up to a square hatch. "Go," I said. "What about you?" "I'm right behind you."
But you go first. If you try to close the hatch on me, I will pull you back down into this hell myself. He nodded frantically and scrambled up the ladder. He pushed the hatch. It groaned, heavy with rust, but gave way. Cool, damp air rushed in, real air, not the recycled rot of the store. He climbed out. I followed, favoring my bruised leg. As my head cleared the hatch, I looked down one last time. The office was filling up. The black sludge was rising from the floor drains, pouring from the ventilation ducts. and in the center of the room, standing in the pool of muck, was the clerk. I blinked. The clerk was climbing out of the hatch above me. I could see his sneakers on the gravel roof. But down in the office, the clerk, or a perfect gray copy of him, stood looking up at me. It smiled. Its teeth were needles. "Don't turn off the lights," the copy whispered. I slammed the hatch shut and spun the locking wheel. I collapsed onto the gravel roof, gasping for air. The wind was howling up here, cold and biting. I shone the flashlight around. The kid was standing near the edge of the roof, staring out at the horizon. "It's gone," he said. "Everything is gone." I limped over to him and looked over the edge. The gas station was indeed an island, but it wasn't surrounded by water. It was surrounded by the bridge. The reality of the world had been overwritten. In every direction, stretching to the horizon, was the rusted iron railing and the rotting wood planks of the Altman Bridge. The gas station sat in the middle of it, a bizarre anomaly on an infinite span of steel. And below the bridge, in the infinite darkness, the river roared. But the river wasn't made of water. I shone the beam down over the edge. The river was made of hands. Millions of pale, wet hands, flowing like a current, reaching up toward the girders, grasping at the air. And they were rising. The level of the river was higher than the bridge deck. It was lapping at the walls of the gas station. "We can't stay here," the kid said, his voice devoid of hope. "We have to keep moving," I said, though I didn't know where. "The lights. Look for lights." I scanned the endless, impossible bridge. Darkness. 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 Then, miles away, a flicker. A single lonely streetlight, buzzing yellow in the void. "There," I pointed. "That's miles away," the kid said. "Walking on that." He pointed at the bridge deck, where shadows were already pooling between the planks.
"It's the only light left in the world," I said. "We walk or we feed them." I checked the flashlight. The beam wavered slightly. "Check your batteries," I told the kid. He reached into his pocket. He froze. "I dropped them," he whispered, "in the store." I looked at my own flashlight. It was heavy, reassuring, but I knew how fast batteries drained when fighting the dark. "Then we walk fast," I said. I took the first step off the concrete roof and onto the rotting wood of the infinite bridge. The wood groaned under my weight. Creak. And from below, the river of hands surged upward in response. Giggle.
Chapter 7. The Rust and the Rot. The transition from the gravel roof of the gas station to the wooden deck of the bridge was a threshold between two different kinds of hell. Behind us, the gas station, that glowing, sterile box of commerce, was sinking. I didn't look back to watch it go, but I heard it. The groan of metal shearing, the pop of pressurized tanks, and then a wet sucking sound as the infinite river of hands pulled the entire structure down into the abyss. We were alone. "Don't stop," I rasped, aiming the flashlight beam at the rotting planks ahead. "Josh, right? Your name tag said Josh." The kid, walking a step behind me, didn't answer immediately. He was shivering so violently I could hear his teeth clicking together. "Yeah," he whispered eventually. "Josh." "Okay, Josh. Stay in the light.
Do not step into the shadow. Do not look over the railing. The bridge was impossible. It stretched forward into the gloom, a tunnel of rusted steel girders and crisscrossing trusses that seemed to spiral endlessly. The wood beneath our feet was soft, spongy with rot and moisture. Every step squeezed water from the grain, dark, oily water that smelled of copper and old blood. To our left and right, beyond the rusted railings, was the drop. I made the mistake of sweeping the flashlight beam over the edge. 50 feet down, the river churned. It was a shifting, undulating mass of pale gray. Thousands, millions of hands. They reached upward, fingers splayed, grasping at the empty air. They moved like sea anemones in a current, synchronized in their hunger. There was no water, just the wet slap of flesh on flesh, a sound like thousands of people clapping softly in a cavern. "They're singing," Josh murmured, drifting toward the railing. "No, they're not," I snapped, grabbing his hoodie and yanking him back to the center of the deck. "Keep walking." But I heard it too. It wasn't singing. It was a low, discordant humming. A nursery rhyme slowed down to a funeral dirge. "Rock-a-bye baby, on the treetop." "The light," I said, focusing on the distant yellow speck ahead. We walked for what felt like hours, though my watch had stopped at 12:03 a.m. The flashlight became heavy in my hand, the aluminum grip slick with sweat. The beam was already losing its crisp white edge, yellowing at the fringes. "My batteries," Josh said suddenly. "I know."
"We're going to run out. We'll find more." "Where? We're on a bridge in the middle of nowhere." "Look," I interrupted, pointing the beam forward. A shape loomed out of the fog about 50 yards ahead. It was blocky, metallic, and sitting dead center on the tracks. A car. It wasn't my Ford and it wasn't Jim's truck. It was an old sedan, maybe a Buick from the 80s, its paint oxidized to a chalky blue. It sat on its rims, the tires long since rotted away. "Maybe they have a flashlight," Josh said, hope injecting a dangerous energy into his voice. He started to jog. "Wait," I hissed, limp running to catch up. "Don't approach it blind." We reached the car. The windows were caked with grime and interior condensation, making it impossible to see inside. The vehicle smelled distinct, not just of the river, but of enclosed, stale decay. "Hello?" Josh called out, tapping on the passenger glass. Tap. Something tapped back from the inside. We both jumped back. I raised the flashlight like a club. "Did you see that?" Josh whispered. I heard it. I moved to the driver's side, keeping the light trained on the glass. I wiped a circle in the grime with my sleeve. I peered in. The car wasn't empty. Sitting in the driver's seat was a man, or what was left of one. He was bloated, his skin translucent and peeling, like paper soaked in water. He was wearing a flannel shirt that had fused to his flesh. His hands gripped the steering wheel so hard the bone was visible through the knuckles. And in the back seat, I choked back bile. 2 car seats, 2 small, pale forms strapped in. They weren't moving, but their heads were turned toward the window, facing me. Their eyes were open, but they weren't eyes. They were small pools of black water. "Is there anyone in there?" Josh asked from the other side. "No," I lied.
It's empty. Let's go. Click. The sound of a door lock popping up. It came from the back door on Josh's side. Josh, get away from the car. The door unlocked, Josh said, reaching for the handle. Maybe there's a trunk release. Maybe there's a flare gun. Don't touch it. Josh pulled the handle. The rusty door groaned open. Water spilled out, gallons of it, rushing from the dry interior of the car as if the vehicle held an ocean. It splashed over Josh's sneakers. And with the water came the laughter. Giggle. A small wet hand shot out from the dark interior, grabbing Josh's wrist. Josh screamed, "Ah!"
Piercing shriek that cut through the bridge's ambient hum. He tried to pull back, but the leverage was against him. He was yanked forward, his torso slamming against the frame of the car. "Mike!" I ran around the hood, sliding on the wet planks. I aimed the flashlight directly into the back seat. The light hit the thing holding him. It was a child, yes, but its jaw was unhinged, hanging down to its chest, revealing a throat that looked like a drain pipe. It hissed, the skin of its face smoking under the LED beam. It recoiled, releasing Josh. Josh fell backward onto the planks, scrambling away on his hands and feet. "Run!" I yelled. But the car wasn't finished. The driver, the bloated thing in the front seat, turned its head. The neck snapped with a wet crack. It looked at us. It opened its mouth, and a torrent of black sludge vomited forth, spilling over the dashboard. We sprinted. My ankle was on fire, every step sending shockwaves of agony up my leg, but terror is a potent fuel. We ran past the Buick, past the puddle of black vomit, deeper onto the bridge. Behind us, car doors were opening. Screech, slam, screech, slam. And then the sound of wet feet. Slap, 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 slap. They were chasing us, not from the river below, but from the car. Faster, I urged Josh, who was panting, clutching his wrist where the hand had grabbed him. The skin there was already turning gray, a handprint-shaped bruise blossoming instantly. The flashlight being bobbed wildly with my running stride. Then it flickered. My heart hammered against my ribs. No, no, no. It flickered again. Longer this time, a full second of darkness before the light surged back, dimmer than before. "The battery," Josh wheezed. "It's dying." "It's the bridge," I said. "It's draining it." We were losing our shield. "The light ahead," Josh pointed. The distant yellow speck was closer now. We could see the pole it was attached to, a rusted, archaic iron stanchion rising from the side of the bridge. It cast a pole of sickly, sodium vapor yellow light onto a section of the deck. "Get to the circle," I commanded. "Get under the lamp." We pushed harder, our lungs burning. The footsteps behind us were gaining. I could hear the wet, gurgling breath of the things from the car. The flashlight dimmed to a brown glow, barely illuminating my boots. Jump. We threw ourselves into the circle of yellow light beneath the street lamp. We landed on the wood, gasping. I turned immediately to face the darkness we had just fled. I held the flashlight up like a weapon, but the bulb gave one last weak pulse and died. Total darkness surrounded the pool of yellow light. We waited. From the gloom, just at the edge of the illumination, shapes gathered. The man from the driver's seat stood there, dripping wet, his head lolling on his broken neck. Beside him, the two small figures from the car seats. They stood hand in hand. They stared at us with those black, watery eyes, but they didn't enter the light. They stood at the perimeter, inches from the yellow glow, vibrating with malice. "They can't come in," Josh whispered, hugging his knees. "The light burns them." "For now," I said, looking up at the street lamp. The bulb was old.
It buzzed with a sound like angry hornets. The glass housing was cracked, and inside I could see moths fluttering. No, not moths. I squinted. They were tiny, translucent hands, fluttering wings made of fingers, beating against the glass from the inside. "Mike," Josh said, his voice trembling, "look at the floor." I looked down. We were safe in the circle of light, but the wooden planks inside the circle were different. They weren't just rotting. They were transparent. Beneath our feet, through the ghostly wood, I could see the river of hands clearly. It was only a few feet below us, and rising from the mass of hands, directly beneath where we sat, was a face. It was massive, the size of a car. A pale, bloated face submerged in the river of hands. Its eyes were closed, but as I watched, the eyelids began to flutter. "Don't move," I whispered. "Don't make a sound." The street lamp above buzzed loudly. Psst. The giant face below the planks opened its eyes. They were bright, blinding white lights, high beams. The face was looking up at us, and then the planks beneath Josh began to dissolve. "Mike!" He scrambled toward me, but the wood turned to mist under his weight. His leg punched through the deck, dangling into the abyss. 1,000 tiny hands from the river grabbed his sneaker. "Help me." I lunged, grabbing his forearms. I pulled, digging my heels into the remaining solid wood. The street lamp flickered. The giant face below the planks opened its mouth. It didn't roar, it didn't scream. It cried. A sound so loud, so mournful, it felt like my eardrums were bursting. It was the sound of every lost child, every grieving parent, magnified into a sonic weapon.
"Pull me up," Josh screamed, his eyes rolling back in his head. I pulled. I strained until the veins in my neck bulged. But the hands below were stronger. They weren't just pulling him down, they were absorbing him. His jeans were turning into gray sludge. His leg was merging with the river. "I can't hold on," I yelled. The street lamp popped. Sparks showered down. The yellow light vanished. We were in the dark, and the hands were everywhere.
The darkness didn't just return, it slammed shut like the lid of a lead coffin. "Josh!" I screamed, but the name was torn from my throat and swallowed by the roar of the wind. I was still holding his forearms. I could feel the coarse fabric of his hoodie, the frantic, vibrating tension of his muscles as he fought to pull himself up. But beneath him, the bridge had ceased to be wood and steel. The planks had dissolved into a semi-solid membrane, a digestive tract that had opened to accept him. "Mike, it burns! It burns!" Josh shrieked. His voice wasn't coming from in front of me anymore. It was moving down. I dug my boot heels into the rotting wood, leaning back, straining until my shoulders felt like they were dislocating. "I've got you! Kick! Kick your legs!" "I don't have legs," he wailed. And then the resistance vanished. It wasn't that he let go, it was that the substance of him gave way. The hoodie in my grip went slack, not because it slipped, but because the body inside it seemed to liquefy. There was a wet, tearing sound, like a heavy canvas sack ripping open, followed by a sickening slurp from the abyss below. I fell backward, tumbling hard onto the damp planks, clutching empty, sodden fabric. "Josh!" Silence. No splash, no scream, just the rhythmic, wet thwack, thwack, thwack of the river of hands clapping below in the dark. I scrambled to my knees, sweeping my hands blindly in front of me. "Josh!" My fingers brushed against the edge of the hole where he had fallen. It wasn't jagged wood, it felt warm, pulsing like the lip of a giant open wound. It was slick with a thick mucus-like fluid that smelled of copper and ozone. I recoiled, wiping my hand frantically on my jeans. I was alone. I sat in the absolute dark, my breath coming in ragged, hyperventilating gasps. The silence of the bridge began to return, heavy and oppressive, but it wasn't empty. Giggle. It was right next to my ear.
I swung my fist blindly into the dark. It connected with nothing but cold, damp air. Giggle. Now it was on my left. Sob. Behind me. I scrambled to my feet, spinning in a circle, my hands out to ward off invisible attackers. I had no light. The flashlight was dead weight in my pocket. The street lamp was a smoking ruin above me. Get away from me, I yelled, my voice cracking. Tap. A finger touched the back of my neck. It was ice cold. It traced a line down my spine, slow and deliberate. I bolted.
I didn't know which way was forward or backward. I just ran. I ran until my lungs burned and my twisted ankle screamed in protest, sending white-hot lances of pain up my leg with every impact. I ran with my hands stretched out in front of me, terrified of what I might touch, terrified of what might touch me. The bridge felt different now. The planks were no longer uniform. Some were soft, squishing like sponges under my boots. Others were hard and uneven, like I was running over piles of smooth stones. Or skulls. I tripped, sprawling forward onto the deck. My hand slapped against the surface. It wasn't wood. I felt ribs. I felt the curve of a jawbone. I felt the hollow sockets of eyes. The bridge wasn't made of steel and timber. Not here. In the dark, the illusion had stripped away. I was crawling over a calcified mass of remains, fused together to form the span. I gagged, scrambling up, slipping on something wet and viscous. Don't turn off the lights. I didn't. I wept into the darkness. I didn't turn them off. You took them. As if in response, a faint red glow appeared in the distance. It was weak, barely a smudge against the black, but it was light. It throbbed rhythmically. Pulse, 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 like a slow heartbeat. I limped toward it. It was my only anchor. As I drew closer, the red glow revealed the outline of the bridge's superstructure. The trusses here were twisted, bent inward like a rib cage closing around a heart. The fog was thick, swirling in the red glow, turning the air into a bloody mist. The light was coming from a car. My car. My Ford sat in the middle of the bridge, exactly where I had left it at 12:03 a.m. But it wasn't right. It looked infected. The metal was covered in a layer of gray, pulsing moss. Veins of black sludge ran across the hood and roof, pumping fluid into the vehicle. The taillights were on, casting that red glow, but they were dimming, breathing with the bridge. And the car was rocking, gently, rhythmically, like a cradle. I stopped 10 feet away. The air here was freezing, cold enough to see my breath misting in the red light. Is anyone there? I whispered. The rocking stopped. The driver's side door was open, just a crack. I needed the headlights. I needed to tit in, turn the key, and flood this nightmare with high beams. It was the only weapon I had left. I crept forward. The sound of the river below was deafening here, a roaring torrent of misery. I reached the door.
I grabbed the handle. It was slick with slime. I pulled. The door groaned, the hinges screaming like a dying animal. The interior light didn't come on. The dashboard was dead. But sitting in the driver's seat was me. I stared, my mind refusing to process the image. It was me wearing the same clothes, my hand gripping the steering wheel. But this version of me was gray, motionless, and covered in a fine layer of white dust. Baby powder. The figure turned its head slowly to look at me.
Its eyes were gone. In their place were two small, perfect handprints indented into the flesh of the face. "You shouldn't have stopped," the thing that looked like me whispered. Its voice was a chorus of children. Then it dissolved. It crumbled into a pile of gray ash and baby powder, collapsing onto the seat. I didn't scream. I was past screaming. I threw myself into the car, sweeping the pile of ash off the seat. I jammed my key, which I realized I had been clutching in my pocket the entire time, into the ignition. I turned it. The engine roared to life. It was the sweetest sound I had ever heard, the mechanical, combustion-fueled roar of modern engineering. "Yes," I shouted, slamming the door shut and locking it. "Yes." I grabbed the headlight knob. "Don't turn off the lights." "I'm turning them on," I hissed. I twisted the knob. The high beams blasted into the darkness. The world in front of me was illuminated in stark, blinding white, and I saw what the bridge really was. It wasn't infinite. It didn't go on forever. 50 yards ahead, the bridge simply ended. The steel girders were sheared off, jagged and broken, pointing out into a void of swirling gray clouds. And hanging from the broken end of the bridge, gripping the jagged steel with hands the size of vans, was the source. It was immense, a pale, bloated titan that hung in the abyss, its body submerged in the fog. Only its head and shoulders were visible. Its skin was translucent, blue veins pulsing beneath the surface. It had no eyes, no nose. Just a mouth. A vertical slit that ran from its forehead to its chin, stitched shut with thick, black, rusted chains. As the headlights hit it, the creature recoiled. It hated the light. It shrieked, a sound that shattered the windshield of my car instantly, spraying safety glass over me. The chains on its mouth pulled tight. It raised a hand with dozens of fingers, each one ending in a human face.
It slammed the hand down onto the bridge deck, crushing the rusted railings like paper. The impact shook the car, bouncing it on its suspension. It was blocking the path. It was blocking the exit. But behind it, through the translucent skin of its giant hand, I saw something. Beyond the creature, floating in the void, were lights. Street lights, porch lights, headlights. It had stolen them all. It was hoarding them. A swirling galaxy of stolen light trapped behind the bulk of the monster. If I wanted the light back, I had to go through it. I looked at the gear shift. I looked at the monster. I looked at the pile of ash that used to be a copy of me on the passenger seat. "Some stories are fed," I whispered, gripping the wheel. I slammed the car into drive. I floored the gas. The Ford surged forward, tires spinning on the wet, bony deck. The speedometer climbed. 10, 20, 30. The creature loomed closer, filling the windshield. It raised its massive hand to swat me like a fly. I didn't lift my foot. I drove straight at the giant, stitched-up mouth. The Chapter 9, The Gullet of the Void. The impact didn't feel like hitting a wall. It felt like driving into a waterfall of freezing gelatin. My Ford, screaming at 80 miles per hour, slammed into the Titan's chest, just below the stitched vertical maw. I had aimed for the chains, hoping to sever them, but the creature shifted at the last second. The massive, multi-fingered hand that had been descending to crush me clipped the trunk instead. Metal shrieked.
The rear of the car crumpled like foil, the back glass exploding inward. The force lifted the rear tires off the bone-strewn deck, sending the car into a violent, sickening spin. We didn't stop. The momentum carried us forward, plowing into the translucent, gelatinous flesh of the entity. The world turned milky white and agonizingly cold. The windshield, already shattered, gave way completely. The substance of the monster, a thick, freezing slime that smelled of ozone and stagnant pond water, flooded the cabin. It hit me like a physical blow, coating my face, filling my nose and mouth. It tasted of old pennies. The car tumbled inside the beast. Gravity ceased to exist. We were suspended in a viscous amniotic sac, spinning in slow motion. The headlights, miraculously, were still on. Their beams cut through the internal gloom of the creature, illuminating the horror of its anatomy. There were no organs here, no heart, no lungs, no stomach. There were only cages. Ribs made of rusted rebar and driftwood curved around us, forming a vast internal cathedral. And trapped within those ribs were the lights. Thousands of them. Street lights, porch lights, flashlights, headlights, candles. They floated in the slime, tethered to the rebar ribs by pulsating black veins. They weren't just bulbs, they were memories. Inside the glowing filaments of a stolen porch light, I saw a family eating dinner. Inside the harsh beam of a flashlight, I saw a boy running through the woods. The creature didn't just eat electricity. It ate the safety that light provided. It digested the concept of hope. My car slammed against a rib of rusted iron, jarring my teeth. The airbag didn't deploy. The sensors were likely clogged with the slime. I was thrown against the steering wheel, the breath driven from my lungs. The ash pile on the passenger seat, the gray copy of me, exploded into a cloud of dust, mixing with the slime to turn the air into a gray, suffocating paste. "Let me out," I screamed, choking on the sludge.
The car was dead. The engine had stalled, drowned in the creature's fluids. But the battery was still pushing power to the headlights. The beams hit a cluster of lights directly ahead. One of them was a fluorescent strip, the gas station. Inside the long, humming tube, I saw Josh. He was tiny, trapped in the glass, pounding on the walls of the bulb, screaming silently. Beside him, in a pair of dim yellow headlights, sat the family from the Buick. The creature was a library of the lost. Then, the pressure changed. The slime around the car began to constrict. The Titan was reacting to the foreign object in its gut. The rebar ribs groaned, bending inward. It was crushing us. The roof of the Ford buckled. The metal screamed, popping rivets like gunfire. I couldn't stay in the car. It was becoming a coffin. I kicked the driver's side door. It was jammed against a rib. I looked at the passenger side. The door was crumpled, but the window was open. I unbuckled my seatbelt. The mechanism jammed. No, no, no. I tore at the strap, panic rising like bile. The roof came down another inch. The glass of the rear-view mirror shattered. I grabbed a shard of glass from the passenger seat, a piece of the windshield, and sawed at the webbing. The nylon frayed, snapping strand by strand. Crunch! The roof collapsed on the driver's side, pinning my left shoulder against the seat. Pain flared, hot and blinding. My collarbone snapped with a sickening pop. I screamed, thrashing wildly. The belt gave way. I scrambled over the center console, sliding through the gray ash and slime, gasping for air. I threw myself toward the passenger window. I fell out of the car just as the Titan's internal pressure crushed the vehicle flat. I watched, suspended in the gel, as my Ford was compacted into a cube of scrap metal. The headlights flickered, the beams swinging wildly through the gloom one last time before the bulbs shattered. Darkness. Absolute crushing darkness inside the belly of the beast. I held my breath. The slime burned my eyes. I was floating, untethered. But I wasn't alone. Something brushed against my leg, then my arm. The stolen lights were drifting closer.
Without the car's high beams to blind them, they were drawn to the heat of my living body. A soft yellow glow appeared near my face. It was a nightlight, a small plastic bulb shaped like a star. Inside it, a baby was sleeping in a crib. The light touched my cheek. It felt warm. Then,
Another light, a heavy maglite beam. Inside, a security guard walking a perimeter. They swarmed me, a galaxy of stolen photons. And then I felt the current. The slime wasn't static, it was flowing downward. I was being digested. I kicked, my broken shoulder screaming, propelling myself through the goo. I didn't know which way was out, but I knew I couldn't go down. Down was where the lights went to die. Down was where they were drained until they were nothing but cold glass. I saw a tear in the creature's flesh above me, a jagged wound where the car had impacted. A faint gray light filtered through. The exit. I swam. It was like swimming through molasses. My lungs burned for air. The pressure in my ears was immense. A hand grabbed my ankle. I looked down. It wasn't a hand made of flesh. It was a hand made of black wire shooting out from the darkness below. It wrapped around my boot. Then another wire wrapped around my waist. The veins, the black veins that tethered the stolen lights, were reaching for me. They wanted to plug me into the system. They wanted to harvest my spark. I kicked out with my good leg, my heel striking the wire. It vibrated, humming with a low electric frequency. It held fast. I was being dragged down. I looked up at the tear in the flesh. It was closing. The creature was healing. No, I bubbled into the slime. I reached into my pocket. My hand closed around the only thing I had left, the dead flashlight. It was useless as a light source, but it was heavy aluminum. I swung it down, hammering the black wire on my waist. The metal struck the vein with a dull thud. Nothing. The wire tightened. I felt a sharp prick as a needle-like probe tried to pierce my shirt, seeking the skin of my stomach. I swung again, harder, channeling every ounce of terror and rage into the blow. The bezel of the flashlight cracked against the wire. Sparks flew, real electrical sparks. The slime around the sparks ignited. It wasn't a fire like the lighter fluid. It was a chemical reaction. The creature's blood was flammable. A bubble of blue fire erupted around me. The heat was instantaneous. The wire recoiled, shriveling away from the flame. The slime boiled. I was in the center of an explosion. The force of the expanding gas launched me upward like a cork from a bottle. I shot through the closing wound in the Titan's chest, bursting out into the gold-gray air of the void. I was falling. I tumbled through the mist. I fell past the broken end of the bridge. I fell past the river of hands. I fell into the deep, deep dark. The wind roared in my ears. I squeezed my eyes shut, waiting for the impact, waiting for the end. But the impact didn't come. Instead, the air grew warmer. The roar of the wind died down. I felt a splash. Not water, not slime, mud. I hit a soft, yielding surface with a wet thud. I rolled, mud filling my mouth, gasping for air. I lay there for a long time, listening to the silence. My shoulder throbbed, my ankle burned, but I was alive. I opened my eyes. It was night. I was lying on a riverbank. The mud was thick and black.
Above me, the sky was a deep, starless velvet, and stretching over the river, looming high and rusted against the dark sky, was the bridge. The real bridge. It looked normal, just aging steel and concrete. No bones, no hands. I sat up, wiping the mud from my face. Had I made it? Had I fallen out of the nightmare and back into reality? I looked at my watch. The glass was cracked, but the digital display was still working. 12:03 a.m. I froze. I looked up at the bridge again. Sitting in the exact center of the span, illuminated by the moonlight, was a car. My car. It was pristine. The engine was off, the lights were off, and standing next to the car, sprinkling baby powder onto the roof, was a man. Me. I watched, paralyzed, as the other version of me waited in the silence. Then, from the mud right beside me, right where I sat in the darkness under the bridge, a sound emerged. Sob. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a monster. It was me. I opened my mouth to scream, to warn him, to tell him to run. But when I tried to speak, the only sound that came out was a high, thin, terrifying cry. Wah! I slapped my hand over my mouth, but the sound didn't stop. It leaked through my fingers. I looked at my hands. They were small, pale, 5 tiny fingers. I looked down at my body. My clothes were gone. My skin was gray and translucent. I looked at the water next to me. In the reflection, I didn't see Mike. I saw a child with hollow black eyes and a mouth stitched shut with river weeds. Above me on the bridge, the other Mike leaned against the railing and whispered into the dark, "Hello?" And I, the monster beneath the bridge,
felt a hunger so sharp it felt like love. I took a breath that rattled in my tiny, dead chest, and I answered him. Tap.
Chapter 10. The Hunger of the Story. The mud was cold, but my blood was colder. I sat in the mire beneath the bridge, my small, translucent legs submerged in the black water. Around me, the river wasn't flowing, it was waiting. The millions of hands I had seen from above were here, swaying like seagrass in a gentle current. They brushed against my skin, not with malice, but with a terrible, welcoming familiarity. "Welcome home," the river seemed to whisper, though the sound was just the lapping of water against stone. Above me, the steel girders groaned under the weight of the car. My car. I looked up. Through the gaps in the rotting planks, I saw the undercarriage of the Ford. I saw the heat shielding, the exhaust pipe, the oil pan. And I heard the heartbeat. Thump, thump. Thump, thump. It wasn't mechanical. It was the frantic, terrified pulse of the man sitting in the driver's seat. Me. I remembered this moment. I remembered sitting up there, wrapped in the illusion of safety, believing in steel and concrete. I remembered the suffocating silence. But down here, there was no silence. The air was filled with a low, vibrating hum. It was the sound of hunger. It radiated from the mud, from the rusted pilings, from the throat of the titan that slept in the void beyond the bridge. I needed to warn him. I needed to tell him to start the engine, to reverse, to burn rubber until he hit the main road and never looked back. I opened my mouth. My jaw felt stiff, the skin around my lips tight and scarred, as if stitched by invisible thread. "Go!" I tried to scream, but the air in my lungs was wet and heavy. The word didn't form. Instead, a sound tore from my throat, a high, mournful wail that echoed off the concrete abutments. Wah! Above, the car shifted. The heartbeat spiked. He heard me. I scrambled up the embankment. My movements were wrong, jerky, arachnid, too fast.
My hands, with their tiny, pale fingers, dug into the rusted iron of the bridge support. I didn't climb like a man. I climbed like a spider, adhering to the wet metal. I reached the deck level. I pulled myself over the railing, sliding through the gap in the rusted bars. I was on the bridge. The car sat in the moonlight, coated in a fine layer of white powder. It looked beautiful. It looked like a feast. The hunger hit me then, a sharp, physical pain in my empty stomach. It wasn't a hunger for food. It was a hunger for fear. I could smell it on him.
It wafted from the car like the scent of baking bread. It made my mouth water, a thick black ichor drooling from my stitched lips. No, I thought, fighting the urge. I have to save him. I crept forward on hands and knees. The wood was rough against my palms. Tap. My hand hit the roof of the car. I froze. Inside, I saw myself, human Mike, flinch. His eyes were wide, darting around the dark interior. He was terrified. The fear was delicious. It washed over me, warm and intoxicating. I felt stronger. My limbs felt less brittle. More, the bridge whispered. Feed the story. I didn't want to. I wanted to stop, but my hand moved on its own. Tap. I pressed my small, cold palm into the baby powder on the roof. The white dust felt soft. I lifted my hand, leaving a perfect, tiny print. Inside the car, human Mike was hyperventilating. "Hello?" he whispered. The sound of my own voice, alive, warm, human, broke my heart. I crawled onto the hood. I wanted to look him in the eye. I wanted to smash the glass and scream, "You are killing us! You are feeding the loop!" I dragged my body through the powder. The smell of it, clean, artificial nursery scent, mixed with the river rot. I reached the windshield. I pressed my hands against the glass. Human Mike stared right at me, but he didn't see me. He looked through me. To him, I was invisible. I was just a pressure, a presence, a smudge in the powder. He reached for the headlight knob. "Don't," I thought. "The light hurts." He twisted the knob. Flash! The high beams ignited. The light didn't just illuminate, it burned. It felt like acid being thrown onto my skin. I shrieked, throwing myself backward off the hood, rolling into the shadows of the trusses. The engine roared to life. He was leaving. Panic seized me. If he left, I would be alone here, alone with the Titan, alone with the river of hands. I couldn't stay. I was tethered to him. I was his shadow. As the car peeled out, tires screeching on the wood, I lunged. I didn't land on the car. I landed in the car's shadow. I merged with the fear he was trailing behind him like exhaust. I traveled with him. I was the cold spot in the back seat as he sped down the highway. I was the condensation on the windows as he pulled into the driveway. I was the dread that kept him awake at night. And the next morning, as the sun rose and the world tried to return to normal, I was the one who climbed onto the hood of the car in the garage. I pressed my hands against the windshield from the inside, desperate to communicate. I traced the letters in the condensation. DONTTURNOFFTHELIGHTS. It wasn't a threat. It was the only advice that mattered. Because I knew what lived in the dark now. I knew that when the lights went out, the bridge came to the house. I knew that the Titan used the darkness as a doorway. If he kept the lights on, he might keep the bridge away. He might starve the story. But he didn't understand. I watched him read the message. I saw the horror in his eyes. He didn't see a warning. He saw a threat. He didn't see a savior. He saw a monster. And his fear fed me. It made me solid,
It gave me the strength to tap on the ceiling, to drag my wet body across the kitchen floor, to blow out the light bulbs one by one. I was doing it. I was haunting myself. Every scary thing I did, every noise, every flicker, every touch, was just me trying to reach him, trying to make him understand. But the more I tried, the more terrified he became, and the more terrified he became, the more monstrous I became. I was trapped in the narrative. I was the antagonist in my own tragedy. And then the end came. I watched from the shadows of the bridge as human Mike drove the car into the Titan. I felt the impact. I felt the loop close. As human Mike exploded out of the Titan's chest, falling into the mud to become me, I felt a strange sensation. Fading. My purpose was done. The new monster Mike was born in the mud below. The cycle was secure. I looked down at my hands. They were turning into dust. Gray, powdery ash. I was on the bridge again. The real bridge. It was quiet. The car was gone. The wreck was gone. But then, headlights cut through the trees. A new car. A red Honda. It drove slowly, tentatively onto the bridge. The driver was a woman. She looked at her dashboard clock. 12:03 a.m. She stopped in the middle. Engine off. Lights off. Darkness swallowed everything instantly. I felt the pull. The hunger. It wasn't fading anymore. It was renewing. I wasn't Mike anymore. I wasn't a ghost. I was the legend. I was the story that had to be fed. I looked at the woman in the car. She was holding a container of baby powder. I crawled toward her, my movements silent on the rotting wood. I reached the roof of her car. I waited. She sprinkled the powder. I raised my hand. Tap. She screamed. And in the darkness, beneath the bridge,
A new child began to cry. The lights would eventually go out for her too, and when they did, I would be there. Because you can never really turn off the lights. You can only close your eyes and wait for the hand to touch the glass.